My name is Aurora, and my childhood was a fairy tale. Not the sanitized, modern kind, but the old, grand ones, with castles and kings and a love so bright it felt like it could light up the world. Our castle was Havenwood. It wasn't just a house. It was a living, breathing entity of warm stone, whispering oak forests, and gardens that exploded in a riot of color my mother, Isabella, tenderly coaxed from the earth. My father, Alexander, had built his empire, Vance Industries, from a single, brilliant idea in a garage, but his heart was always here with us. I can still feel the sun on my skin that last, perfect afternoon. I was 17, sprawled on a blanket under the ancient willow tree by the koi pond, a book of poetry forgotten in my lap. I was watching my parents. Dad was trying to explain a complex business merger to Mom, using twigs and pebbles on the grass. She was listening with a soft smile, not really hearing the details of corporate acquisitions, but simply loving the sound of his voice, the passionate light in his eyes. "Aurora, my little star," he'd said, catching my gaze. "Remember, all of this, the company, the money, it's just a tool. It's what you build with it that matters. It's the legacy you leave." My mother had reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your legacy is your heart, my love. Never let anyone harden it." I didn't know it then, but they were giving me my final instructions. My father's words became the blueprint for my revenge. My mother's became the moral compass I would cling to in the darkness. The shadows of our story arrived for dinner that night. Aunt Cordelia, my father's sister, a woman carved from ice and ambition. Her husband, Charles, a man whose smile was a transactional event. And Uncle Silas, my mother's brother, whose laughter was a little too loud, his compliments a little too calculated. They were the discordant notes in our symphony, and that night their jealousy was a palpable fog at our dining table. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. The world fractures at such mundane moments. A police officer, an accident, the rain-slicked road, no survivors. The days that followed were a smear of gray pain. The funeral was a nightmare of black fabric, muffled sobs, and the cloying scent of too many lilies. I floated through it, a ghost in my own life. I remember Cordelia's hand, cold as marble, on my shoulder. "Be strong, dear," she'd whispered, but her eyes were dry and sharp, already scanning the room, assessing her new domain. Silas had taken charge of the arrangements, a role he embraced with a grim efficiency that felt like a desecration. I was too deep in the ocean of my grief to see I was being steered toward the rocks. A week after the funeral, we gathered in my father's study. The room still smelled of his sandalwood cologne and old books. It was my sanctuary, and it was about to become the scene of the crime. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling with the dead eyes of a shark, did the talking. He produced a will, not the one I knew existed, locked in the safe, but a newer one. It spoke of my youthful impetuosity, my profound grief that could lead to poor judgment. It declared that control of Vance Industries, the vast fortune, and the deed to Havenwood were to be placed in a trust managed jointly by Cordelia and Silas until I reached the mature age of 30. I was to be given a paltry monthly stipend, a pittance meant to keep me quiet and dependent. "The company needs steady, experienced hands, Aurora," Cordelia said, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "Your father knew this. He wanted to protect his life's work." "This is a lie." My voice was a raw, broken thing. "He would never do this. He trusted me." Silas finally spoke, not meeting my eyes. "Your aunt is right. It's for the best. You need time to heal, not the burden of a corporation." I fought. I screamed. I called them vultures. But I was a 17-year-old girl against a wall of cold, adult calculation. My protests were framed as the hysterical outbursts they had predicted. The family lawyer, an old friend of my father's, was suspicious, but the document looked legitimate, and he was outmaneuvered. I had lost. The gavel of their greed had fallen. I was given 1 week to pack 18 years of my life into 2 suitcases. Cordelia oversaw the process, her lips pursed as she decided what was suitable for me to keep. My mother's jewelry, too valuable for a young girl. My father's first edition books. He would have wanted them to stay in the library. The morning I left, it was raining. A uniformed driver, a stranger, loaded my bags into a bland sedan. I stood on the grand portico of Havenwood, the home where I had learned to walk, to read, to dream. Cordelia stood in the doorway, a silhouette of victory. "Don't make a scene, Aurora. It's beneath you." I didn't say a word. I got in the car. As we drove down the long, winding driveway, I didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had a past to return to. Mine had just been stolen. My new home was a state-run group facility for girls. It was a place of shared rooms, thin blankets, and institutional food. The other girls were hardened by lives I couldn't imagine. I was an alien to them, the princess who had fallen from grace. I was utterly, completely alone. The first night I cried until I had no tears left, and then a strange, cold stillness settled over me. A month into my exile, a social worker handed me a single, taped-shut cardboard box. "Your things from the house," she said dismissively. It was mostly old clothes and a few books, but at the bottom, tucked inside my worn copy of Jane Eyre, was my father's personal journal. It was a secret he'd shared only with me. He used it for his most private, unfiltered ideas. My hands trembled as I opened it. Most of it was complex formulas, business strategies, and sketches. But on one page, he had written a letter to me. "My dearest Aurora, if you are reading this, the world has been unkind. I am so sorry. Do not let it break you. Let it forge you. Remember our talks about legacy. I've enclosed the key to mine, my life's work, Project Phoenix. It's a self-regenerating polymer, a material that can heal itself. The world isn't ready for it, but you will be. Build something beautiful with it. Be brave, my little star. I love you forever." And there it was, the Phoenix Code. Pages and pages of chemical equations, molecular structures, and production methods. It was his true inheritance. Not the money, but the mind. It was a seed, and in the cold, barren soil of my new life, I planted it. The next 5 years were a relentless montage of struggle. I graduated high school and got a job as a waitress by day and a night shift stalker by night. I lived in a cramped, roach-infested studio apartment. Every spare moment and every spare dollar went into my secret project. I used the public library's computers for research and began ordering cheap lab equipment online, conducting rudimentary experiments on my kitchen table. I encountered failure after failure. Explosions of failed compounds, strange odors that made my neighbors complain, and the constant, gnawing fear that I was just a deluded girl chasing a ghost. But my father's words were my mantra. Let it forge you. A breakthrough came when I managed to get a job as a lab assistant at a local community college. It was there I met Professor Alden, a brilliant, cynical, and retired materials scientist who smelled of coffee and disappointment. He caught me running a forbidden experiment after hours. Instead of firing me, he stared at my notes, his eyes widening. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. I told him the truth, not the whole story, but enough. He saw the fire in my eyes and the genius on the page. He became my mentor, my Yoda in a stained lab coat. He taught me the science I was missing, challenged my assumptions, and honed my mind into a razor-sharp weapon. After 2 years under Professor Alden's tutelage, we did it. We created a stable, working sample of the polymer, which we named Aether Weave. It was a miracle material, light as silk, strong as steel, and capable of repairing minor cracks when exposed to a specific electrical current. The next step was the business. Professor Alden introduced me to a sharp, young, hungry lawyer named Ben Carter, who was willing to work for equity. We filed the patents under a newly formed shell company, Aether Innovations. I used every last cent of my savings to rent a tiny, leaky warehouse on the bad side of town. Our first break was a local outdoor gear company. I demonstrated Aether Weave by slicing a sample of a tent fabric with a knife, applying a small battery, and watching the cut seal itself. The CEO's jaw dropped. We had our first contract. It was for $50,000. It felt like 50 million. The company grew, slowly at first, then with meteoric speed. Aether Weave was a disruptive technology. We attracted venture capital, then more, then a tidal wave of investment. I learned the language of business not from a textbook, but in the trenches, negotiating with billionaires, managing a growing team, becoming the face of a revolution. I shed the skin of the broken orphan. I became Aurora, the Aether Queen. I cultivated a public image of cool, unflappable intelligence. I wore stark, expensive white and black suits, my hair always perfectly styled, my makeup a flawless mask. Behind the mask, the girl from Havenwood was a raw nerve, but the world only saw the Titan. I was building my army and my war chest, and I never for a single moment forgot my target. A decade after my exile, I was ready. Aether Innovations was a global powerhouse, and I was a billionaire many times over. The trigger was a Business Insider profile of Cordelia's husband, Charles, whose construction firm was thriving. The article featured a photo of them hosting a gala at Havenwood, my home, my mother's roses in the background. The cold fire that had been smoldering in my chest for 10 years erupted into an inferno. I summoned my board. "We're moving our global headquarters," I announced. "We're going home." The news was a sensation in my hometown. The prodigal daughter returns, not with a whimper, but with a seismic boom. I bought the tallest skyscraper in the city and renamed it the Aether Spire. Cordelia and Silas saw the headlines. They were curious, even eager to meet this new billionaire. They sent invitations. I had my assistant decline them all. The hunt had begun. I started with the weaker predator, Silas. He had used his stolen wealth to build a slumlord empire, a fact my private investigators confirmed with chilling detail. My revenge was a masterclass in financial annihilation. Through a labyrinth of shell companies, I began purchasing all the debt on his properties. Then, I unleashed a coordinated attack. City inspectors, tipped off by anonymous sources, swarmed his buildings, citing hundreds of code violations. Simultaneously, a devastating exposé was published in the newspaper, complete with photos and testimonies from his neglected tenants. His reputation was shredded. Finally, I called in all his debts at once. The banks demanded immediate payment. He couldn't comply. The foreclosures began. Within 6 months, Silas was bankrupt, facing lawsuits and under criminal investigation. The man who stole from his own orphaned niece was now penniless and pariah. Cordelia was a harder target. Her power was social and reputational, built on her husband's wealth. I dismantled it piece by piece. Charles's firm was bidding on a massive public infrastructure project, a new bridge. Aether Innovations outbid him with a superior, Aether Weave reinforced design. It was a very public humiliation. Then, the real blow landed. A whistleblower from within Charles's company provided evidence to the SEC of systematic accounting fraud and the use of substandard materials. The story dominated the news cycle. Their stock price collapsed. Their assets were frozen. The social invitations evaporated overnight. The queen of high society was now a leper. I watched from my penthouse as the vultures they called friends picked their carcass clean. With both of them financially crippled, I went for the heart. Cordelia, in a desperate attempt to save face, had taken out a massive mortgage on Havenwood. I bought the debt from the bank for a premium, becoming her creditor. I went to Havenwood myself. I didn't drive up the grand driveway, I walked, like a ghost returning. Cordelia answered the door herself, her face pale and drawn, her expensive clothes hanging loosely on her. "Aurora, what are you doing here?" I didn't smile. I simply handed her the formal notice of foreclosure. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises. It belongs to me now." The color drained from her face completely. She looked at me, and for the first time she didn't see a helpless girl. She saw the Aether Queen. She saw her destroyer. The door shut in my face, but I had already seen the victory in her eyes. It was over. I didn't keep Havenwood as a home. The ghosts were too loud. Instead, I poured a fortune into restoring it, not to its former glory, but into something greater. It became the Alexander and Isabella Vance Foundation, a world-class STEM school and sanctuary for orphaned and underprivileged children. The halls that once echoed with Cordelia's avarice now ring with the sounds of discovery and hope. I walk the grounds sometimes. The willow tree is still there. I can almost see them. I finally understand my father's words. The empire, the revenge, it was all a tool. This legacy of lifting others up is what I built with it. I honored my mother's wish. My heart is not hardened. It was broken, and then it was rebuilt. stronger and more resilient than Aether Weave itself. The orphan heiress is gone. Long live the future we build.